Ladies and gentlemen, let's Gaming Sitcom video. I think it's fair to say that the Wii U has met with a fairly lukewarm success. The CEO of Nintendo, and I'm sure you'll know who he is, but Satoru Iwata has actually been discussing this with Time magazine, and he admits that he has been rather disappointed with the performance of the Wii U, and obviously I'm sure many of you are aware that Nintendo are going to be moving into the mobile platform. They're going to be producing games basically for mobile phones and, you know, tablets and so forth. But what's really behind Nintendo? What they're hoping for? So right now, the original Wii did really well. The Wii sold just over 100 million units, which is really impressive. Now, considering that, yes, the console didn't have a particularly amazing attachment rate, in other words, there wasn't an astounding amount of games sold for the Wii versus the amount of consoles sold, so the average Wii owner didn't have a massive games library, in other words, the actual system was still pretty profitable and appealed to a fairly wide demographic, a fairly wide audience. It wasn't just considered to be a console for the casual gamer. There were a lot of hardcore games on it as well, and of course you had pretty excellent titles all around. The Wii U hasn't really managed to capitalize on that, and we can argue the reasons and semantics behind it. I would probably go as far as to say that the primary ones would, at least in my opinion, be the specifications, the fact that people were a bit confused regarding the whole controller situation, and the big one, Microsoft and of course Sony were just waiting in the wings, but people knew that they were developing these systems, and because of the performance of the Wii U, in other words the actual physical performance of the hardware, and because Sony and Microsoft were touting their next generation systems as being able to calculate the acceleration of the universe, then it wasn't really too much of a surprise that, well, Nintendo kind of slumped a little bit with the Wii U sales. So, as I've said, Nintendo has announced that Nintendo's titles will be appearing on mobile devices, and the company is slowly clawing its way to profitability again. It is slightly profitable at the moment, and it's done so by, yes, trimming down some of the fat, and I don't really like to use that term when it comes to actually firing people. They actually had to let go 300 employees in Europe, but that's just the reality of the situation, unfortunately. So yes, it's now returned to modest profitability. It's certainly not making as much money as it ideally would like to, but even so, after the fact that it had made losses for 3 years in a row, it's certainly better than what it was. So, what's the situation? Well, we all know that Nintendo are not going to be giving up hardware. They are not going to just become Sega. They don't want to do that. They want a hardware platform. They want that. They want that place in your living room. And, well, what are they going to be doing? This is a question. The most obvious thing that Nintendo are planning, of course, is NX. Now, we don't know all of the details. In fact, to say we don't know all of the details is vastly overstretching it. We don't really know that many details at all. All we do know about it is that it's going to be a new platform, and they're going to be leveraging several hit titles and utilizing Nintendo's IPs on that system. I won't speculate too much on the specifications in this particular video, mostly because I've been through all of the rumors of Nintendo systems previously, but the likelihood is, and obviously likelihood does not equal to this is what it's going to be, but the likelihood is they seem to be partnering with AMD. And as I've said, logically, if you follow the steps, there's a couple of options. One, it could be just as powerful as the PS4/Xbox One. And obviously there is a power gap between those two consoles, but let's just, for the sake of argument, say that they're roughly in the same ballpark as one another. in terms of CPU and GPU performance. There is a difference, but just for the sake of argument in this particular video, we're just going to say that they're roughly in the same ballpark. So yes, the Nintendo could just create a system that's roughly that level of performance, or it could go with something that's considerably cheaper to produce, because obviously at that point the PS4/Xbox One/SOCs would be pretty cheap to produce anyway, and therefore it could make something cheaper but slightly less powerful, or it could go the whole hog. And what it could do is produce something that's considerably more powerful than those systems but costs the same at launch, which is definitely a good possibility. It would pretty much obliterate any fears that people had of, hey, it's not powerful enough. Conceivably, let's say using the 300 range based GPUs from AMD, I don't see a particular reason why the system couldn't hit, and I'll just give you an idea, like 2.5, 2.6 T-flops without too much difficulty really. But anyway, moving on. Iwata has pointed out that the Wii U he's not happy with the performance of it. He says that they're not happy with it. It didn't do as well as what they had hoped. And obviously the reality is that they believe that it could well be that people are recognizing it as perhaps the second best console. Now what they mean by that is they don't mean that, hey, the PS4's first, the Xbox One's third, and therefore they're in second, or, you know, the Xbox One's first and they're second, or what have you. What they mean is that people are going to probably buy the system as a second system. So you buy a PS4 and you'll buy a Wii U, or buy an Xbox One and you'll buy a Wii U, you'll have a gaming PC and you might have a Wii U. In other words, it's good for maybe when people get together or what have you. And it's definitely a fairly solid argument, because if you think about it, yes, the Wii U is used online, obviously, but the main draw, at least for people I know who've got the system, is the fact that, yes, you've got Smash Brothers, you've got Mario, and all of these other, Mario Kart, and all of these other titles that you can play with others, and then of course you've got good single-player experiences like the new Zelda, Mario's, and so on and so forth. So it does make a good second system. The problem is, it's just not selling the numbers that they need. It's doing better than it was, mostly because of pretty robust titles over the last year or so, but it hasn't met the reception that they really hoped for. And analysts agree. The Digital World Research analyst P.J. McNeely, that's a bit of an odd name, said, and I quote, "I think they've bought themselves time to figure out what the next monumental step is." And even the CEO of Ubisoft agrees. He believes that the challenge for Nintendo now is to make sure the hardware continues to be convincing enough for people to actually bloody well buy it. Obviously I added bloody well. So that's kind of the thing. It's that old adage of the people need to buy the system for people to develop on it, and then people need to develop for it for people to actually buy the system. After all, you're not going to buy a system if it's got no sodding games on it, right? I don't think Nintendo are dead, but what the problem for Nintendo has always been is innovation, and by which I mean that it's not that the systems that they put out or the ideas they have in terms of gaming aren't cool, it's just that it requires an inordinate amount of time. It's like trying to steer a bloody cruise ship just to make a slight little course correction when they just need to make a simple change to their policies. And this is a problem that Nintendo have had, and you can Google this yourselves, but it basically goes down to the fact that if a person doesn't understand or like a concept, they can veto it, and because each of their board members have that ability to veto, it really screws them over. And they also tend to get a lot of negative publicity. This whole YouTube thing, where of course they've made their own YouTube channel and they're aggressively, it's not as bad now, but they were aggressively going after people who were running, playing bloody Mario Kart or reviewing it or what have you. It's frankly ridiculous, and it does not do them any service at all. I've been over that a billion times, so I don't want to retread too much old ground, but it just doesn't make sense to me. It just hurts my head. It's like, I fail to understand how you can have a company that are struggling to sell their product, and the best sales tactic you could have is have others play your game and show that it's fun. Particularly, I can actually slightly understand the argument more for like Assassin's Creed or a title where it's got like a solid single player storyline, but when a game like bloody Smash Brothers or Mario Kart, I would really want that shown off, because you know, you get a couple of popular YouTubers playing that sucker, and you know, all of them playing it and having a good time with their friends. That's worth a lot more. You don't want those popular YouTubers to say, hey, screw Nintendo, I'm not going to play their titles because of X reason. So I think that's also hurting them. They've definitely lost some of the social media. Personally, I also believe that because gamers now, you know, who grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and they bought the NES, they bought the SNES, and they obviously most likely migrated even to the N64. Modern day gamers, you know, younger gamers now, they probably didn't, there's a good chance anyway, they didn't grow up with Nintendo, at least with the loving memories that the older gamers did, which is possibly also causing them some problems. And to many, the PlayStation was their first console. I know several people who that's the case. I think personally it's solid that Nintendo are getting into the mobile space, and I think that's a definite positive for them. But at the end of the day, this is not a situation that Nintendo thought they were going to be in, let's say 6 months ago or a year ago, or even when the Wii U was a series of blueprints on someone's table. What they wanted, as you can probably imagine, was the Wii U to be a success. It was to be another Wii. And the GameCube didn't do amazingly. I personally think the GameCube was pretty astounding as a system. It had some quirks. I really didn't like some of the aspects of the controller. Primarily the buttons were a bit uncomfortable. At least in certain games. Other games it worked really well. However, as a game system, it was really awesome, and there were some astounding games on it. But it didn't sell maybe as well as what they hoped, but Nintendo certainly got back to good form with the Wii. But the Wii U, just for a series of unfortunate reasons, it just never really picked up the steam that it needed, and as Iwata said, well, you know, they're just disappointed with it, and they've tried. It's not that Nintendo are not putting in the effort, it's not that they've just abandoned it. And we all know that that's pretty much what happened with Sega, right? Sega shot consumer confidence to crap in the late 16-bit era, when the SNES was starting to once again overtake the Genesis or Mega Drive. You know, for a while Sega and Nintendo were really competitive, and then eventually Nintendo started to pull ahead again, at least in certain regions, and eventually Sega said, hey, we're going to release, you know, various add-ons, which started to hurt the consumer confidence. And one of the reasons behind that as well is, of course, they wanted a cheap way for people to get into 32-bit gaming. Unfortunately, they just did it really poorly, and because of the way that Sega's companies, or should I say different branches of Sega Japan, Sega Europe, Sega America, all were not really communicating with one another, you had this situation where they're actually competing almost against each other in terms of the ideas, and that's actually what even happened with the Dreamcast, believe it or not. So Nintendo don't have that situation. They are fully supporting their own hardware. The problem is, it's really difficult to be the only one that's producing high quality content, and they certainly are not. You do have other developers and other publishers on the system, but just not as many as what they'd hoped. What I'm personally hoping, the next Nintendo console, when it's unveiled, which will probably be next year, at least from the signs, I'm hoping it's going to be a pretty powerful system. I'm hoping it's going to be more powerful than the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, not for any other reason than for Nintendo's sake. People are going to bloody well expect it. It's like, if you're going to release something 2, 3, possibly 4, I mean obviously it depends on their time schedule, years after their rivals, you cannot have it where it's going to be inferior technically. It has to be at least on par, at the very least on par, preferably more powerful. They need to resolve their issues when it comes to YouTube and other social media disasters. And then I think they'll be a cool company. I don't think there's anything wrong with Nintendo's products. I think, you know, everything's going pretty well for them. Aside from they just need to crank into the console market again. Anyway, with that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.